Hello, and welcome to the Nutrition Digest podcast. We're your hosts and registered dietitians, Alicia Kugler, Tara Valenti, and Summer Merrick Williams, here to dish up the nutrition tea, dispel the myths, inspire, inform, and hopefully entertain. Today, we're breaking down one of the most requested topics, macronutrients. What are they? How do they work in your body? And how do you figure out the right macro split for your goals? Whether you're looking to improve performance, build muscle, lose fat, or just understand how to fuel better, this episode is your one-stop shop. We've experimented with different splits ourselves, and we'll talk you through how to play around with them so you can find out what works best for you.
But before we dive into macronutrient splits themselves, we want to take a step back and really talk about what macronutrients are. Because I know for some people, this is old information, but for some of us listening in, we just want to give you a little bit of information just to clear up kind of this term. So macronutrients are the three primary nutrients that make up calories and energy in our body. Each three are important for different functions in our body, which I'm going to go over, but they're needed in larger amounts, so macro amounts versus micros, vitamins and minerals, which we'll get into in another episode. So for us, it is important for optimal function of the body, hence macros. So the first one is the one that I feel like gets a lot of attention in the fitness world, which is protein. So it is the building block for muscles, enzymes, hormones. It helps repair tissues, so facilitating recovery from that workout that you did. It supports your immune system and it keeps you fuller for longer. You find it in kind of like a lot of the known sources of meat, fish, eggs. A lot of our dairy products are quite high in protein as well. Legumes, our soy products, protein powders, and sometimes even our grains can have a little bit of protein in there as well. We're living in a day and age that you walk into the grocery store and there's protein on every single package. So it's nice when you're trying to up that protein intake. The second one I feel like is the one that also gets a lot of attention in the nutrition world, which is carbs. I think a lot of times we demonize them, but they are our body's preferred energy source. And we've talked about them in great lengths in other episodes. So make sure you go back and you look at those different episodes we've done. So they fuel our brain, muscles, they fuel our workouts, our movement, and they make it so that we can even have this podcast today. So because we are all pro-carb people. It also supports hormone function and sleep because it is a precursor to a lot of the different neurochemicals in our brain. So carbs are found in fruit, veggies, grains, rice, oats, bread, pasta, any sort of sugar, honey, and even as well dairy products have lactose in it, which is a form of carbohydrate. And then moving on to the last one, which is fat. So it is essential for hormone balance, brain health, absorption of our fat soluble nutrients. So meaning we need to have fat in order to absorb vitamin A, D, E, and K. And the fats also help to regulate inflammation and they help to stabilize our blood sugars. So we'll talk a little bit about why fats are important for certain populations more so than others. Fats are found in oils, nuts, seeds, avocado, fatty fish, butter. There's lots of different sources that we can get it from, even a little bit of dark chocolate. We can get some fats there. And then in terms of the calorie breakdown, I know I talked about these are needed in larger amounts in order to giving us calories. So each different macronutrient gives us a certain amount of calories for every 1 gram. So for protein and carbohydrates, we have four calories per gram. And then for dietary fats, we have 9 calories per gram. And technically, we do have a fourth macronutrient, alcohol, which I think a lot of people misunderstand because I think a lot of people like to clump alcohol into carbs or into fats. And it is its own separate macronutrient and it provides a different amount of energy. It's 7 calories per gram. However, it doesn't have a lot of that same function or nutritional value as the other 3. So a lot of us, we don't really consider it the same kind of nutrient, but we'll save more details about alcohol for another day.
So in order to start the conversation in talking more specifically about macronutrients and quantities and how much you need or what balance might be right for you, we have to first at least briefly touch on calories. I think calories are kind of the foundation, and then we break that apart into macronutrients because that's where your calories are coming from. So estimating caloric need is a little bit nuanced, and it's going to be obviously very different for each individual person. We recommend a structured but flexible approach to finding your baseline calorie needs. I find that what a lot of people end up doing is going online and using an app or using a calorie calculator to estimate their needs. And although those can be helpful, oftentimes they're not very accurate, particularly if you're using an app that's supposed to help you lose weight. A lot of times, I mean, I've had people who have come in and they're like 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds, and their calorie counting app told them to eat 1,200 calories a day. So that's obviously way too low. And that is actually usually the default minimum amount of calories that they'll recommend in these apps for all humans, regardless of their size. So we want to be a little bit weary when we're using things like that to calculate calorie needs. I personally like to use the DEXA scan as my starting point for calculating calorie needs for clients that I work with, because we have that actual data around their body composition and how much muscle mass they have. So we're able to calculate it a lot more accurately than using one of the online calculators. But those online calculators can be a good starting point. What you want to be looking for is something like the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, which can be a really good starting point. And essentially what you're trying to calculate is your total daily energy expenditure. So you can do a TDEE calculator that you find online in order to kind of get your starting point there. And then if your goal is to lose body fat, you're going to want to subtract from that number, usually around 300 to 500 calories a day. Or if you're trying to gain muscle mass or add body weight, you're going to want to add to that number, usually about 200 to 300 calories a day. So your macronutrient splits are going to be percentages of your total calories, but we want to focus a little bit more on grams than percentages. Again, that's going to kind of depend on the individual and what their goals are. This is very nuanced. So this is something that I would absolutely recommend working with a registered dietitian so that you can get a number that you can feel confident in and we know is appropriate for you. So long story short, calculating the calorie target is the foundation from which we dive into the macronutrient balance, and Summer is going to give us a little bit more detail about those macro splits now.
Exactly. So again, this is a very generalized breakdown of the macronutrient splits. It's very nuanced and it depends a lot, not only on your individual body weight, height, age, and your breakdown of lean muscle mass and fat mass, et cetera, but also what your goals are. Depending on what you're looking to achieve will really affect the percentages of carbs, fats, and protein that you have on a daily basis. So for example, if you're looking to lose fat, you want an even split between the three or high protein. So we aim for about 30 to 35% protein and about 35 to 40% carbs and about 30% fat. It also could look a little bit like that 35% protein and then even 35% carbs and 35% fat. This is in order to help keep you full, to preserve your muscle and support recovery. It's also great for women in fat loss phases or those with insulin resistance and PCOS. So for example, if you're eating an 1,800 calorie a day diet, that would look like somewhere between 158 to 180 grams of carbs, 135 to 158 grams of protein, and approximately 60 grams of fat. Secondly, we have endurance training. So for those who are looking to fuel for endurance, we really increase those carbs. So we end up increasing them to about 50 to 65% carbs a day, 15 to 25% protein, and 20 to 30% fat. Now, this is because your body is going to need a lot more carbohydrates in your diet to fuel you for these long endurance activities that you're doing, running, especially our ultra runners like Tara, triathletes like Alicia, etc. And this is because carbs fuel for the long runs, the long rides, and the protein supports your recovery. Also, proper fueling equals optimal performance and your desired adaptations. So for an example of an endurance training would be something along the lines of if you had 2,500 calories per day, that would look like approximately 325 grams of carbs, 125 grams of protein and 70 grams of fat. And then muscle gaining. So if you're trying to bulk up, gain muscle mass or body recomposition, we look again for a little bit higher in the carbs than if you're in a fat loss cycle. And that would look like approximately 40 to 50% carbs, 25 to 30% protein, and 20 to 25% fat. Now, more carbs will be used for the training output that you're doing. So we still need that increased fuel and an increased protein as well, or a higher amount of protein to support that muscle protein synthesis. So, for example, if you're having a 2,700 calorie a day intake, that'll look like approximately 280 grams of carbs, 170 grams of protein, and 70 grams of fat. From there, let's go to our vegan or plant-based diets. Now, this is a little bit different because, again, if you're not getting your protein from animal sources of protein, sometimes that can be a little bit trickier in terms of your macronutrients. So we take that protein down a little bit. So we look for approximately 25% protein and 45 to 55% carbohydrates and 30% fat. Now, you may need a little bit more calories in order to reach the protein needs because, as I said before, plant-based sources of protein generally are a little bit lower in protein or the amount that they have per serving than our animal proteins. You can use soy, lentils, tofu, tempeh, and vegan protein powders to help you get to those protein goals. And with a vegan or plant-based diet, you really want to plan your meals intentionally. Plants bring more carbs with protein. So what you want to do is really think about what you're eating because, again, it may be more hard or more challenging to get the amount of protein that we want during the day. And you want to think about what plant sources you can use per meal. And we want to mix different proteins together just so we get all of our amino acids in as well. So for example, a stir fry with tofu and edamame served over quinoa and topped with peanuts. So it's a good mix of everything, but multiple sources of protein in there. And then for general wellness or a balanced lifestyle, we can think of it as more of a across the board split. So 33% across the board. So proteins, fats, and carbs. It's a very easy way to start when you're trying to plan and figure out what your macronutrient breakdown is. It provides variety and flexibility and supports maintenance or gentle recomposition for your goals. But really, again, all this is incredibly nuanced. You know, it's very, very easy to say that this is your exact macro split, but there's so much that can make these numbers fluctuate or that go into determining this. So, Tara, what about the quality of nutrients?
Yeah. So whenever we bring up the discussion of macronutrients, and especially when I'm talking to clients about prioritizing things, I always bring up the concept of quality versus quantity, because so many times I have seen people who are very, very focused on getting the perfect macronutrient balance, but their diet quality is terrible. So they might have amazing, perfect macronutrients, their calorie targets, they're hitting it like within 5 calories a day. They're really diligent about making sure that they hit their numbers. But when you actually look at their food journal and take a look at what they're consuming and how they're getting to those macros, it's like all processed foods. And I see this really often in people that are hoping to gain muscle mass, or they might be going through like a bulking phase and they're consuming literally like all protein bars and protein shakes and products that are designed for that population and they're marketed for that population. And maybe they're using like a greens powder and calling that their vegetables. And like, that's kind of defeating the purpose. So you might be hitting your macronutrients and you might be making some progress. But as a whole, if we think about your body's optimal functioning, you're really doing yourself a disservice. It's likely that you're not getting enough fiber. It's likely that you're not getting enough antioxidants and phytochemicals and those other beneficial nutrients that we get from a balanced array of foods. So I always like to remind people that although macronutrient balance is essential to pay attention to if you're trying to achieve, especially a body composition or a performance goal, it's also important to make sure that you're paying attention to the diet quality as well, because that piece of the puzzle is so, so, so important.
I don't know, Tara or Summer, if you remember the If It Fits Your Macro trend that was really big. I think it was like 2014, 2015. I know because I was in the bodybuilding world at that point. And it was like, you hit your macros and like you eat a bunch of Oreos and like ice cream, and you hit your macros that way with like protein shakes on the side. And it was just like, you can eat whatever. And it's like promote flexibility. And I think for a lot of people, it could be a very, very slippery slope, because you're not necessarily, I remember like at that point, like I was doing my master's, and I remember talking to like people that were going down that way, and they're like, I'm hitting my macros, but like I'm not really satisfied, or like I don't have great energy, or like X, Y, and Z problems. And it's like, okay, let's take a step back. And I think that's really important consideration that you were mentioning, Tara, to like focus on the quality a little bit more and think about that. But it's still having that flexibility too. It's like making sure we still have some of that fun food as well, because I think we can go off the deep end as well in the orthorexic route.
Oh my God, definitely. If anyone has listened to our podcast, they know that we believe in balance, and we definitely believe in like, eating a bowl of pasta or eating pizza or cinnamon rolls or whatever it is. It's whatever makes you happy, sometimes ice cream. But this just made me think of the concept of like a clean bulk versus a dirty bulk. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah. So like, I've talked to a lot of guys who've been in this boat before, where their calorie needs are super high and their goal is to just hit the calorie target. And partially just because they don't really know how to do it properly, they end up eating like loads and loads of pizza and fast food and fried foods and ice cream and things that are just really calorically dense, because they're trying to hit that calorie goal so that they can bulk. But they're also really just not doing their bodies right by consuming massive amounts of these types of foods, versus like a clean bulk, which is such a silly phrase. Like we're talking in dude bro language right now, but clean bulk would be the opposite, where you're trying your absolute best to hit those calorie targets with high diet quality, which is a really difficult thing to try to do. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know more and more evidence coming out about how like you can have two people with like same macronutrient needs, that like, so maybe someone's relying a little bit more on processed foods versus the person's focusing more on like whole foods, and they can actually have extremely different body composition outcomes in the end. So it's interesting to kind of see like how the evidence is trending, and like understanding a little bit more about the processed foods affecting our body, which I feel like we could have a whole episode on itself.
Totally. And before we dive into the next topic, which I think is an interesting one, I also want to talk a little bit about why we balance it this way, because there's some confusion, I think, around the strategy around the macronutrient balance. So when we're talking about the individual who is trying to lose body fat, I think sometimes it's a little bit confusing as to why they should be having a higher protein target, because they're like, well, I'm just trying to lose body fat. I'm not trying to put on muscle mass. Like, why should my protein target be so high? And I think explaining that a little bit might be helpful. So how do you guys explain that to your clients?
Well, I first talk about the importance of protein, not in terms of muscle growth, but also in terms of satiety. So protein keeps you full. So if we want to lose weight or body fat, we want to stay fuller longer, so we're less likely to go into our cupboard and grab extra food or be hungry and have more snacks, more dessert, more other things that aren't going to serve our goals. So that's basically the main thing that I talk about in the benefit of protein and why we go so protein forward on our diet.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, usually when they're going through like a fat loss phase, for example, they're increasing their activity a little bit more. And so they're more prone to have delayed onset muscle soreness. So having that higher protein intake will actually help their body feel less sore, and kind of explaining that to them as well. And then I would say also with the protein, we're going to have a highest thermic effect of food. So that means that through the consumption of protein, we're going to have a higher kind of like digestive output, like in terms of the energy that our body's using in comparison to carbs and fats. So I think it goes, it's protein first and then carbs and then fats don't really have any thermic effect.
Right. Yeah. I think that's so helpful to know too, because it's like, well, if you're trying to lose body fat, it's likely that you're trying to be in a calorie deficit. And if you want to be in a calorie deficit, but be relatively comfortable while you're in that deficit and not like white knuckling it through every day and thinking about food all the time and feeling really, really hungry, you can support that through getting sufficient protein. So I think that is probably helpful for people to know and understand. And then I think the other thing that people often get confused about, especially my mostly male population that's trying to put on muscle mass, is like, why did my carb target go up? I'm trying to put on muscle. Shouldn't I be focusing more on protein?
So, I get that all the time.
Yeah, same.
Yes. So how do you explain that to your guys who are trying to put on mass?
Carbs are a muscle preserving nutrient, like they're protein sparing. They are going to make it so that our body actually holds on to muscle mass and doesn't break it down. And our body needs carbs to actually fuel your workouts and to put on glycogen and to actually help you build up that size.
Yeah, I say the same thing. And mostly just to break it down even further, not fueler, is that carbs are fuel. And it's that simple. Like if we don't have it, then your body's not going to be able to achieve the goals that you want. So simply, yes, you need the protein to help your muscles grow and all of the other benefits with it, but you really need the carbs to support that.
Well said, guys. I love that.
Yeah.
I just feel like those are such common questions.
Yeah. And I will say for that individual in the bulk, like one thing that it's kind of adding to kind of like the carbs is like carbs bind water, which makes glycogen in the muscle. Yes, energy, but also gives the muscle mass size. So then I think for a lot of people, like they don't put two and two. They think, oh, I'm putting on muscle and like I'm seeing that size difference. Well, it's like also there's water and glycogen in the muscle. That's a big thing as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think also there's a fear of gaining more body fat than is necessary if they're overdoing it with the carbs. That's really common. So just making sure that we've got that balance down. But moving on from my many questions, Alicia, what about hormonal considerations when it comes to macros?
Yeah, so there's two major distinct populations that we kind of look at, that some of these overarching kind of macronutrient splits we might look at shifting in a little bit. So one is kind of our perimenopause, postmenopause population. So for them, we want to really focus on the higher protein or slightly higher protein intake and moderating the carbs a little bit more, not necessarily going low carb, because we don't want to end up in a situation where your energy level goes down a lot. But for that population, we're really trying to focus on stabilizing blood sugars, really trying to make sure we're preserving the lean muscle mass and we're holding on to that bone density as the hormones are going through such a fluctuation. And that's going to be really key during that kind of phase of our life. And that's good, like, especially because we see that huge dip in muscle mass, which is really going to have just such an effect on your health and your longevity and maintaining your body composition after the fact, when you've kind of come at the other side of this shift in your life. The other population that we really look at is the PCOS population. So here we would look at a little bit of carb cycling. I know some people have heard this term in social media, but it is very confusing. And so basically, carb cycling involves eating varying amounts of carbs on different days. First, there's different versions of carb cycling. The most common is kind of like increasing your carbs when you're a little bit more active, or to kind of like have different days of the week that you're having different carb amounts. And so basically there's some evidence that shows that it can improve kind of like hormone balance and fertility in women with PCOS, and it can actually help with kind of like regulating some of our kind of energy needs. It's one of those things that it's like, for some individuals, it works really well, but for others, it's complicated. And that's the thing is, so it might be something that maybe you've been tracking your food for a while and you want to have a good understanding of what foods have what macronutrients. So you're like, hey, I want to try something. I want to see how my body responds. Or maybe you're doing a little bit more intuitively that like, hey, I'm a lot more active this day, so I'm going to have a little bit more carb to kind of match my body's needs. And then maybe I'm a little bit less active today, so I'm going to have a little bit less carbs. And that's kind of like really what it comes back to. And that's the goal there, is to really help with blood sugar management, body composition, hormones as well.
That's super helpful to understand, because I know a lot of people have been asking about carb cycling lately. So it's really nice that you broke it down to explain a little bit more about what that means and who it can benefit. So some of the things that we want to look at also is what happens if we're too low on one of our macronutrients. How do we adjust for that? What are signs and symptoms that can show us that we may be lacking in one of the three? And number one, just starting with protein. If you have too little protein in your diet, you may feel constantly hungry or sore, and you may not recover as well from workouts like you did before or as expected. If you have too few carbs, you may find that your energy is crashing, that 3 p.m. slump, poor sleep, low endurance. That's our fuel. Again, it's like not having fuel in your car. Too little fat, hormonal imbalances, dry skin, mood swings. So we don't talk about fat a lot, but there is something to be said about not having enough fat in your diet as well. I often, I don't know about you guys, have clients who are really proud of themselves when they're so low on their fat, like they're like it's a badge. But really, we need that fat in our diet. And also our training cycles. So if you are an athlete training for different things, it's going to depend, and your macros are going to depend on what training cycle you're in. Are you on season? Are you off season? You may need more carbs when you're off season and more protein when you're on season, but it also depends on your particular sport. So as you're changing your macronutrients and experimenting, you want to make sure you adjust slowly. Maybe think of adjusting one macro at a time so that you don't have any negative side effects, or we can really identify like, oh, this is working for me. I can feel the difference, or maybe not, but you're not having any negative side effects. And also consider logging how you feel. I do this with every new client I have, is I ask them, if we are going to track food, to not only write down what they're eating, but how they feel. What are they experiencing? Are they hungry all the time? Are they having any gastric issues? Are they exhausted? Are they feeling fueled for their workouts? Those are all super helpful and can help you identify how your macros are working for you. But also consider that it could be something other than your nutrition. If you're constantly suffering from poor sleep, for example, or headaches or something like that, maybe it's not resultant of adjusting your macros. So in that case, adjust and consider what else it could be. You know, could it be your stress levels? Could it be your time of the month? Anything like that. And if it is something that's beyond your nutrition, you know, you may want to speak to your health professional, a doctor. And if you're not sure and you think it is resulting from your nutrition, speak to us. This is what we do. You know, this is exactly why you would want to reach out to a dietitian to help you manage and help you determine what your macronutrients should be for your particular sport, your particular phase of life, or your particular goal.
Yeah. Also, if and when you do work with a registered dietitian, I would say one thing to not be shy about is GI stuff, because we talk about poop all the time, every single day.
All the time.
And it's so funny because when I'm talking to clients and they try to approach the topic, some people are just like out with it, like no problem. They don't care. They're not shy. They know that this is what we do. And some people just dance around it so delicately. They're like, oh, this might be too much information, and then they share that they're having some digestive issues. But if you are, oh my goodness, we can totally help you. Like that is something that we deal with all the time. And sometimes it could be macronutrient related. A lot of times it's food specific related. There's a lot of different things that can cause that, but don't be shy with trying to troubleshoot with us. So we had some audience questions come in related to this topic that I was hoping we could dive into today. So there was 3 main questions that came in from our listeners. One was, how important is it to hit my macros every day? If I have 1 or 2 days a week that I'm off target, will it set me back?
I guess I would have a follow-up question for the person. How far off are we talking? Are we thinking like, okay, our goal is 150 grams of protein and we're hitting like 50 grams on that day? That might be a problem. But if it's like, hey, you know what? I'm like 10, 15 grams on either side of each macro goal, like I wouldn't stress it too much. I don't know about what you guys think of that.
Yeah, I think it's consistency over time. I could not care less if we are not at our targets every day, especially if you're under a little bit in carbohydrates and fats. I'm really not that bothered. And if you're not at your exact protein number every day, it's okay. But if you're around that number, that's fine. And there may be a kind of a baseline. So I tell a lot of my clients, it may be for some of my female clients, if you can at least get over 100, we're winning. Because we want to start incrementally. And that's not going to mean if you don't hit your goals, you're going to fail at life. You're going to either gain weight or lose muscle or whatever. One day didn't make us and one day doesn't undo us.
Love that. I feel like this person, based on their question, is probably really goal oriented. And I suspect that their difference is not that massive and they're probably doing okay. Okay. Another question that came in was, at the end of the day, if I hit my calorie target, but I haven't hit my protein goal, should I eat more so that I can hit my protein goal, even if it means I'm eating more calories?
I guess I would have a follow-up question to that as well, as in, how far off are you? What is their goal? Who are they in particular? Are they still hungry? Would be another question.
Yeah.
Because if you're not hungry and it's 9 or 10 p.m. and you haven't hit your protein goal, but you're fine, go to bed and we do it again.
Yeah.
But if it's 6 p.m. and you're 20 grams short and all you need to do is maybe you had your workout and you didn't eat any protein or have any protein post workout, throw in that protein shake. Get that extra protein in. Why not? But so it would really depend on your hunger level. Again, how far off are you? What your goals are, and is this a consistent thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also say, like, okay, how was your activity that day? Did you hit a hard workout that maybe we do try to push for that extra little bit of protein but if you're like, hey, it's a day that I'm like, hey, I wasn't that active and like, I'm not super far off. We'd like, okay, just leave it where it is. But it's not like a yes or no answer. It has to be a little bit more intuitive.
Yeah. I feel like we've used the word nuanced like 40 times in this podcast. It's because it is so nuanced. Like for every question, there's like 15 questions so that we can clarify and make sure and be like, well, we need to know more information about the individual. And that's part of why it's helpful to have an extra set of eyes on your nutrition sometimes, because we're able to kind of figure out what the best answer to that question is for you as an individual. Okay, final question here. My calories and macros don't add up at the end of the day. Which is more important to hit?
Yeah. So the one thing I would say is be mindful of what interface you're using to track your macros on. There are some different platforms, apps out there that have user generated data. And so you have to be really careful because sometimes you're looking at entries and it can be very, very confusing, and you just choose one and like the macros could be like way out of whack or the calories could be way out of whack and you may not even realize it. So just being mindful of that. And then also considering that like sometimes on packaging, it's like maybe they're just rounding the calorie amounts, or like not necessarily like massive, but maybe it's like, hey, maybe the calories were 137.5 and they rounded up to 138 or like that kind of thing. So focusing a little bit more on the macros can be a little bit more. And like for some of us, calories can be a little bit daunting. I know I have quite a large population of clients that like for them, they've calorie counted before and maybe they have some trauma associated with calorie counting. And so focusing a little bit more on the macronutrient balance is new to them. And so kind of like paying attention to that a little bit more can free up a little bit of that mental space of focusing on calories, which they're basically the same thing, but it can be a little bit more mentally helpful. I know, Summer, when we were chatting about this before, you had kind of mentioned a strategy that you take with some of your clients, simplifying it. So just focusing on like,
yes. Thanks for reminding me because I totally forgot. No, but I do with a lot of clients who are struggling with the calorie and macro breakdown in what is more important to hit, or if it seems too overwhelming, is to focus on one or the other. And it also depends on their goal. And I will definitely give them my 2 cents on what I feel is the most important. Usually it will be to focus on protein first and try and get that protein again up to a reasonable number, even if it's not hitting that specific goal if that seems too out of reach, but maybe it's over 100 grams per day, and then staying around the calories. So that way it's a little more approachable. Like what we said earlier, is starting with one macro at a time, or it may be protein and then making sure to stay under in the carbs, or under in, I know this is a micronutrient, but under in the sodium or something like that. So it's very bite-sized and very palatable and a lot more realistic to have wins and achieve. Because I also think for a lot of our clients as well, having wins is super important. We don't want everything to be a negative. You're not losing if you don't reach your calories or go over in calories. You're not failing if you've gone over in your carbs. We want people to realize that it isn't static. This is going to change. Our days change. We don't eat the same things every day. So we want people to just kind of have a general idea of how to stay within that number. And if we can just focus on one thing at a time, I think that can be really helpful.
One of the things I remind clients of, especially clients with a certain personality type, is that sadly, food tracking is not a perfect science. You're never, two apples like don't have the same nutrients in them. I mean, there's like differences between all of the different foods that we consume, and there's just not a perfect way to track everything that we are eating. So we have to be okay with knowing that this isn't going to ever be perfect. And it's actually a good exercise because your nutrition shouldn't be perfect. Like there should be days that are a little bit funky or a little bit off or a little bit weird. That's part of the process. And I think just thinking about food tracking in that way can be helpful, because really at the end of the day, we're just doing the best that we can. We're trying to get as close as possible, and we're trying to manipulate variables to get a certain outcome, but it is absolutely never going to be perfect.
That's spot on. I totally agree. And I know that characteristic or that character type in certain people who really want the numbers to be exactly on target. But also, like Alicia, like you said, in the apps, they may round, but also if you're using the apps where members can enter in their nutrition on different products or different foods, that can also vary as well. So, choosing between 500 options of the same food is very challenging. And you'll see the macronutrient breakdown be so different between the same food. So again, just trying to choose the most realistic or common option. And again, not stress too much. Don't let that be the answer or the end all be all of your nutrition is what it says in an app.
So takeaways and action items for us. So know your goal. Are you aiming for maintenance? Are you aiming for fat loss, muscle gain? Is your priority performance? Really make sure that you define what your goal is, because that is going to guide how you decide what balance of macronutrients you are aiming for so that you can get closer to achieving that goal. That's kind of like step one. And if you're a little bit confused about what macronutrient balance to target based on your goal, we're right here. Also, estimate your calories and then try a macro split that is going to fit your lifestyle. And when we're estimating calories and thinking about how much we need, think about how you spend your days as a whole, not just how often you're exercising, but what you're doing like during your workday, for example, because that's going to play a role as well. Be consistent for a couple of weeks, like 2 to 3 weeks, and then evaluate. How am I feeling? Am I noticing any changes? How do my workouts feel? Kind of do a check-in with yourself to see if you're feeling better, if you're feeling worse. Like, what's this feeling like for you? And then remember that you're not locked into one split when it comes to macronutrient balance. This is a tool, not a rule. So you can modify, adjust, fine tune, and, play around with these numbers until you find a strategy that works for you. I know I've worked with clients for years that we've changed these numbers around quite a bit depending on what their goal was at the time during different phases of their training. So this is something that you don't have to just like decide on your numbers and stick to it forever. You can always change them around, especially during different phases of life. Like your requirements are going to change. So we always like to hear from our listeners. Like we've mentioned before, you can connect with us via email at nutritiondigestpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to learn more about macronutrients and how to best use them to support your goals, you can reach out to us at Nutrition Digest Podcast. We would love to work with you.